Devil Worship in France. R. The Question of Lucifer, a record of things seen and heard in the secret societies, according to the evidence of the initiates. 1896. A.E.Waite. Chapter 3. The First Witnesses of Lucifer. For some, this will be a more interesting topic than the Jehovah's Witnesses. And I'm sure that's why you're here. That the witnesses of Lucifer are in all cases attached to the Latin Church, whether as priests or laymen, is no matter for the astonishment, but it is once realized that outside the Church there is no hostility to Masonry. For example, Robinson's Proofs of a Conspiracy is almost the only work possessing, deservedly or not, any aspect of importance, which has ever been penned by a Protestant or independent writer in direct hostility to the fraternity. Well, certainly the Latter-day Saints didn't like the Freemasons after their leaders no longer were former Masons. And this book was written by that time. Moreover, Catholic hostility varies in vanishing direction with distance from the ecclesiastical center. Thus, in England, it exists chiefly in a latent condition, finding little or no expression until pressure is exercised from the center, while in America, the enforced promulgation of the human genus encyclical has been one of the serious blunders of the present pontificate as regards that country. The bibliography of Catholic anti-Masonic literature is now, however, very large, nor is it confined to one land or to a specific epoch. It has an antiquity of nearly 150 years and represents most of the European continent. That of France, which is nearest to our own doors, is naturally more familiar to us. It is also one of the most productive and may be assumed to represent the whole. We are concerned with it in this place only during the period which is subsequent to the alleged foundation of the new and reformed Palladium. During this period, it falls obviously into two groups: that which preceded any knowledge of the institution in question, and that which is posterior to the first promulgation of such knowledge. In the first, we find mainly the old accusations, which have long ceased to exert any conspicuous influence, namely atheism, materialism, and revolutionary plotting. Without disappearing entirely, these have been largely replaced in the second group by charges of magic and diabolism, concerning which the denunciations have been made loud and fierce. One supplementary impeachment may be said in a certain sense to connect both, because it is common to both. It is that of the unbridled license, fostered by the asserted existence of adoptive lodges. We shall find, during the first period, that Masonry was freely described as a diabolical and satanic institution, and it is necessary to insist on this point, because it is liable to confuse the issue. Before the year 1891, the diabolism identified with Masonry was almost exclusively intellectual. That is to say, its alleged atheism, from the standpoint of the Catholic Church, was a diabolical opinion in matters of religion. Its alleged materialism was a diabolical philosophy in matters of science, its alleged revolutionary plottings being especially directed against the Catholic Church, constituted diabolical politics. Such descriptions will seem arbitrary enough to most persons who do not look forth upon the world from the windows of the Vatican, but they are undeniably consistent at Rome. Now, I personally would not be a part of a path that demonizes the outsider. Oh, well, they have good, they have truth. Everybody does. And being against people that are under the same label as me doesn't necessarily mean that they're, maybe they're opposing the tyrants. There's plenty of tyrants out there that would label themselves something that you would consider for yourselves. A lot of them call whatever government they have is a democracy. But does that mean the people rule? Usually not. Usually it's a fake term they throw out there. Of course, actual diabolism prior to the date I've named, there is, I believe, only the solitary accusation made by MGR, what's that stand for? De Segur, and having reference to a long anterior period. He states that in the year 1848 there was a Masonic lodge at Rome where the Mass of the Devil was celebrated in the presence of men and women. A ciborium was placed on an altar between 6 black candles. Each person, after spitting and trampling on a crucifix, deposited in this ciborium a consecrated host, which had been purchased or received in church. The sacred elements were stabbed by the whole assembly. The candles were extinguished at the termination of the Mass, and an orgy followed, similar, says Major de Segur, and those of pagan mysteries and Manichaean reunions. Such abominations were, however, admittedly rare, and the story just recited rests on nothing that can be called evidence. Now, people always said this about secret societies. That, they make up what happens secretly. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, if you know what goes on in their temples, it's just an attempt to recreate the biblical mythology with their specific interpretations. It's nothing that's actually secret. You may get a phrase or gestures like, I didn't know about that. But, but initiation is initiation. It's about the experience. It's not about telling it to everybody. During the years intervening between 1870 and 1891, we may search the literature of French anti-Masonry in vain for any hint of the Palladium. In 1884, the collaboration of Louis de Estampes and Claudio Janet produced a work entitled Freemasonry and the Revolution, which affirms that the immense majority of Masons, including those who have received the highest grades, do not enjoy the confidence of the true secrets, but the establishment of atheism in religion and socialism in politics as designs of the fraternity are the only secrets intended. Well, certainly the group can function better as being sort of like an interfaith fraternity rather than, because perhaps you could only get, perhaps you'd have a whole bunch of churches in an area and only one person would be, up for going through the mysteries. It's like, well, then you wouldn't have an order. So you have a bunch of people from different churches and stuff like this that, The new and reformed Palladium connects with the Order of the Temple by its supposed possession of the original Baphomet idol. But in 1882, this was entirely unknown. Manager, MGR, what's that stand for? Fava, who denies all the reputed connection between the Templars and Masons and traces the latter to Faustus Sacinus as founder, following Abbe de Franck in his Veil Raised for the Curious. A mystic and diabolical aspect of the fraternity is so remote from his mind that in his Secret of Freemasonry, the Bishop of Grenoble affirms that its sole project is to replace Christianity by rationalism. Well, if you think that people being rational is opposing your faith, I don't know what to say about your faith. The third and concluding volume, the Pierre Deschamps' great compilation on society and the secret societies, supports, on the contrary, the hypothesis rejected by Fava. It recites much old knowledge concerning adoptive lodges, the Illumines, the orders Philoleths of Martinez Pasquale, Pithaleth, yeah, I'm not sure how to pronounce French at the moment. And of Saint Martin, on which subjects few writers indeed can say anything that is new, but while specifically devoted to the political activity of the fraternity all over Europe, the Deschamps tells us nothing of the conspiracy which produced the new Palladium, though the alleged collaboration of Mazzini gave it a strong political complexion. Of Pike, nothing. Of diabolism, still nothing. I may add, his work claims to be verified at all points. In the year 1886 of the Bulgar era, I'm adding in which era it is, era vulgaris, common era. Another ecclesiastic, Dom Benoit, published 2 formidable volumes on Freemasonry and the secret societies, forming part of a masterwork entitled The City of Antichrist in the 19th Century. Like de Estampes and Jeanette, he distinguishes between a small number of initiates and a vast crowd of dupes who swell the ranks of the fraternity. Many Masons ascend the ladder of the grades without receiving the revelation of the mysteries. Well, certainly, people go through it, and because it's not like religion itself, it's like, well, if you've done the right thing, it's the thing. But if people feel satisfaction with going through the mysteries without having the shock that it can cause to people, the inner knowing of what's going on, it's like, well, if they're pleased with it, they're pleased with it. The highest functions of most lodges are said to be given to the dupes, while the ruling chiefs are concealed behind humble titles. It is further represented that in certain countries there are secret rites above the ordinary rites, and these are imparted only to the true initiates, which sounds like a vague and formless hint concerning a directing center, But so far from supposing that such an institution may exist in Masonry, the author affirms that unity is impossible therein. Images of hell and hell anticipated. Masonry is in the realm of hatred and consequently of division. The leaders mutually despise and detest one another. This is a quote. This is what the claim is. And universally endeavor to deceive and supplant each other. A common hatred of the church and irregular institutions alone unites them, and scarcely have they scored a victory, then they fall out and destroy each other. An attachment to the idea of church is more common than opposition to church. But scarcely have they scored a victory, then they fall out and destroy each other. Yeah. The first seeds of the Manichaean accusation are founded in the second volume, but the term is not used in the sense of Albert Pike's Luciferian transcendentalism, but merely as an equivalent of Protestantism, colored by the idea of its connection with the Socinian heresy. In conformity with this view, Dom Benoit attaches himself to the Templar hypothesis, saying that the Albigenses and the Knights of the Temple are the immediate ancestors of Masonry. But the point which is of the most interest in connection with our inquiry is where Dom Benoit asserts that Satan is the god of Freemasonry, citing an obscure grade in which the ritual is connected with serpent worship, and another in which the recipient is adjured, in the sacred name of Lucifer, to uproot obscurantism. It is, however, only a loose and general accusation, for he says that the Mason deity is the creature, that is, humanity, the mind of man, human reason. It is also the infamous Venus, or the flesh. Finally, all divinities of Rome, Greece, Persia, India, and every pagan principle are the gods of Masonry. Now, again, Lucifer bringing the light from a light that's been created. There are two ways to look at this. Looking up to the that sort of, Luciferianism is, there are heroes that have done the hero deeds, accept, remove the obscuration, bring the light. It's talking about becoming a Lucifer, because there's been other Lucifers. Now, whether this is done in some sort of worship of a Lucifer, and Mercury being the messenger, that kind of implies maybe these entities aren't gods. These the Lucifer and whatnot is not a god. Is that is sort of an emissary of God, much like. But obviously, it's something that can happen in the human form. But this is merely indiscriminate defamation, which is without force or application, and the writer evidently knows nothing of a defined cultus of Lucifer existing in the lodges of the fraternity. So also, when he elsewhere states that sexual excesses are sometimes accompanied in Masonry by Eucharistic profanations, he is only MGR disagures out-of-date narrative to support him, and when he hints at magical practices, it is only in a general way, not it's forbidden. No, it's spiritualizing the men's orders, which were always spiritual to begin with. It's only the modern mind that thinks, maybe these things, it's like politics. Politics was always a spiritual put in a spiritual context, whether the leader was corrupt or not. And apparently referring to acts of individual Masons. In one more significant passage, he records, as a matter of report, that apparitions of the demon have occurred recently in Masonic assemblies, where he is said to even have presided under a human form. While there is no mention of Palladianism and none of Pike in his treatise, we may regard Don Benoit as a herald of the coming accusation, speaking vaguely of things half heard. See, didn't Dante bring it up somewhere? And then there was Milton and Blake. So Lucifer ended up with a bad name as a result of, it ended up as a bad name very distinctly, and then pretty much everybody was using it, not realizing its implication, and even church services that remain. Come on. But those who use terms rightly are often demonized. Of course, there is real Satanism going back probably longer than what people would generally call organized religion. And there's proof of that, about 30,000 years to present. And there's reasons to call it that. And if you're saying, 1966 is when it was codified, let's be real here. And it's a phrase that refers to theistic, atheistic. Anton Zander LaVey, he admitted he practiced what you could call theistic Satanism. He tried to have that experience, calling up demons and all that other stuff. And for some reason, rather than sheerly affirming the self and the aspects of the self, enacting traditional Satan worship was part of the Church of Satan. Why are you enacting traditional Satan worship if you don't even believe in a soul? You don't believe that there's a spiritual side, you just believe your flesh. He says, well, it's the focus on the physical aspect. The soul's certainly important. You watch the Satanic Mass. He wasn't completely atheist. He just thought there was a, put on the natural man, as would be called, and anything about the flesh, This is the thing that was implied to him in terms of what he'd been exposed to in terms of Christian belief. So obviously you end up thinking that it's, Satanism becomes the only way to affirm the flesh. See, the flesh, finality, trying to have rationality. It's like, making discovery, dealing with ignorance and making things good. It's like, this is the sort of context you're demonizing these people under. And certainly a Satanist wouldn't necessarily mean, I'm everything they hate. It's like, well, yes, certainly some people want to seem all that rebellious, but they're not. They probably share most of the same values. People generally do. The same sometime previous to 1888 of the Common Era, Paul Rawson, a sovereign grand inspector general of the 33rd and last degree of the French Rite, had come to the conclusion that the mysteries of Freemasonry are abominable, and in that year he published a work entitled Satan and Co., suggesting that in this case a witness to the desired point had at last come forward, and as a matter of fact, the writer does take us a few places beyond the point reached by Benoit. So far as I am aware, he is the first French anti-Mason who mentions Albert Pike, with one exception, to be considered separately in the next chapter. Now, the beliefs and practices of individual members, and even mainstream religions, are not necessarily the ways of everybody. And if you don't understand the style of what people are saying and try to, your own judgments upon it, comment, question my channel. There are certain things like particularly my content that I'm going to plan to put up today. That's bound to be misunderstood. But I do it for people. People have their own interpretation, have your own experience with it. Um, it's not about my opinion is shared on my channel, but that's not entirely the opinion. The purpose of my channel is to inform and let people have an experience, unity, understanding, um, experience, as I say. Except for next chapter. He describes him as the sovereign grand commander of the Supreme Mother Council, of every Supreme Council of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite, and he tells the story of the foundation of that rite, but he knows nothing of Isaac Long, the Palladium, or the skull. He cites also certain work which Pike wrote for the exclusive use of initiates, apparently of the higher grades of these rites, namely the Sefer ha-Debarim, Ethics and Dogmas of Freemasonry, and Legenda Magistrali. But so far from accrediting the order with the supernatural aspect, he affirms that its war cry is annihilation and anathema thereto. Then the Freemasonry is, in fact, social anarchy, the overthrow of monarchical government, and the destruction of the Catholic religion. The Satanism imputed to Freemasonry by Paul Rawson is therefore an arbitrary and fantastic order, having no real connection with this inquiry. 2 years later, the same author published a smaller volume, The Social Enemy, which contains no material of importance to our purpose, but is preceded by a pontifical brief surveying the benediction of Leo XIII to the writer of Satan and Co. We pass now to the year of Revelation, 1891. And so tomorrow, Ex Ore Leonis. And remember that Satanism is a variety of beliefs and practices. Atheistic, theistic, Luciferianism can be said to be even more broad in what it is. Remember that Freemasonry is not something that is, it's not something that is to be seen in terms of, it's not claiming to be a religion. It asks its members to have certain spiritual and ethical principles, but it accepts from the varied spiritual paths. And yes, there is evidence that in this modern age, people openly satanic are being accepted as members. But does that mean that the members have to approve of Satanism? No. They're approving of individuals.